The cheer captain thought she could destroy my life with a few threats, but she had no idea she was trying to blackmail the daughter of a man who spent his entire life hunting monsters. I just wanted a normal high school experience. But when the SUVs pulled into our driveway, I realized my father's business trips were actually cold, calculated missions that were finally catching up to us. The locker room smelled of cheap body spray, stale sweat, and the toxic perfume of entitlement. I was sitting on the wooden bench, trying to lace up my sneakers, when the shadow fell over me. It wasn't just any shadow. It was the looming, sharp-edged silhouette of Chloe Madison, the captain of the cheer squad and the undisputed queen of Northwood High. Beside her stood her two loyal lieutenants, Taylor and Sarah, their faces twisted into those practiced, thin-lipped sneers that had haunted my existence since freshman year. "I don't know what you think you're doing, Maya," Chloe drawled, leaning against the lockers with a clatter of her gold bracelets. "But the uniform you're wearing belongs to someone who actually understands the aesthetic of this team. You're dragging down our visual appeal." I didn't look up. I just tightened my laces, my knuckles turning white. "It's my uniform, Chloe. The coach gave it to me after the tryouts. I earned the spot." "Earned?" Taylor let out a shrill, mocking laugh. "Honey, you were a pity vote. Diversity quota, right? Everyone knows it." I felt the heat rising in my neck. I was used to the comments, the snide remarks about my hair, the subtle ways they'd accidentally knock my books out of my hands in the hallway, or the way they'd strategically exclude me from group chats. But today felt different. There was a malice in their eyes that went beyond high school rivalry. As I stood up to grab my gym bag, Sarah shoved me back down onto the bench, hard. "We aren't done talking," Sarah hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. "You need to quit the team, tonight. If you walk onto that field for the homecoming game on Friday, you're going to regret the day you were born. And trust me, we have ways of making people regret things." I looked at them, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What are you going to do, Chloe? Tell the coach I'm not aesthetic enough? I'm going to the game and I'm going to perform." Chloe stepped closer, her face inches from mine. She smelled like peppermint and hostility. "We don't need the coach, Maya. We have other connections. My father has friends in the city who know exactly how to deal with people who don't know their place. You think you're untouchable because your dad is some guy who travels for work? You have no idea what you're up against. One phone call from my family, and we could have your father slapped with a serious, life-altering charge. Maybe we could even plant some prohibited substances in your car, or find a way to link your family to an organized scheme. We could bury you under a mountain of legal trouble so deep, you'd never see the light of day. A massive sentence for something you didn't even do? It's remarkably easy to frame someone these days." The locker room went silent. My blood turned to ice. They weren't just bullying me anymore. They were threatening my family. My father, my hero, the man who spent years serving in the shadows, risking everything so I could grow up in a safe world, was being weaponized against me as a target. They had no idea who he was. They thought he was just a corporate consultant, a man who traveled for business. They didn't know about the classified missions, the elite training, or the cold, calculated precision that defined his entire existence. "You're making a mistake," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the trembling in my knees. "Oh, are we?" Chloe laughed, grabbing my gym bag and dumping my belongings onto the dirty floor. My hairbrush, my notes, and my inhaler scattered. "Let's see how tough you are when your father is being hauled away by the Service of Internal Security, facing a decades-long stretch for being part of an illegal weapons network. You're going to be crying for mercy by tomorrow morning." I knelt to pick up my things, my eyes stinging with tears I refused to let fall. As I reached for my inhaler, a heavy boot stepped down on my hand. I winced in pain as Sarah ground her heel into my knuckles. "Stay away from the squad," she whispered. I waited until they strutted out of the room, their laughter echoing against the tiled walls. I gathered my things, my hand throbbing, and walked out to the parking lot. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the asphalt. I saw their cars, the shiny, luxury SUVs that belonged to the town's wealthiest families, lining the exit. I unlocked my dad's old, reliable truck and climbed inside, burying my face in my hands. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from my father. "Almost home, kiddo. Anything exciting happen at school today?" I looked at the screen, then out the window toward the school gates. Chloe's car was idling there, and she was watching me through her tinted window, holding her phone up to her ear. I knew exactly what she was doing. I realized then that I couldn't protect my father by staying silent. If I didn't say anything, they would follow through. They were arrogant enough to believe they could destroy us just for the fun of it. I started the engine and drove home, my mind racing. I pulled into our driveway and there he was, standing on the porch checking the locks on the mailbox. My father, with his broad shoulders and eyes that had seen things most people couldn't even imagine in their worst nightmares. He looked up, sensing something was wrong immediately. His smile faded, replaced by a gaze of sharp, tactical observation. "Maya?" he asked, walking toward the truck. "What's wrong?" I climbed out, my hands still bruised and shaking. "Dad, we're in trouble." Before I could get the words out, a black sedan pulled slowly onto our street. It moved with a deliberate, haunting creep. I recognized the bumper sticker from Chloe's father's vehicle. As the car rolled closer, two men stepped out. They weren't high school parents. They were wearing sharp, dark suits that looked entirely out of place in our quiet neighborhood, and they were looking directly at our front door with cold, calculated intent. My father's hand dropped to his side, his posture shifting instantly into a stance I hadn't seen since I was a child. The air around us suddenly felt razor thin, and I knew, in that heartbeat, that the games were over and the war was about to begin. The two men in the dark suits didn't walk. They prowled, their movements synchronized and efficient, lacking the casual clumsiness of local thugs. My father didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He simply stepped in front of me, his presence suddenly overwhelming, like a wall of reinforced steel standing between me and the encroaching chaos. His breathing didn't hitch. It slowed, a rhythmic, deep intake of air that signaled he had flipped a switch inside himself. The man I knew as Dad, who loved jazz records and burnt toast, was gone. In his place stood a predator who had spent 2 decades hunting monsters. "Stay behind me, Maya," he said, his voice a low, vibrating hum that commanded absolute obedience. "Do not move, and do not make a sound." The men stopped 10 feet from the porch. The leader, a tall individual with a jagged scar running along his jawline, adjusted his cuffs. He wasn't looking at my father. He was looking at the house, scanning the perimeter, his eyes darting to the security camera near the eaves. He gave a sharp, imperceptible nod to his partner, who slowly reached into his inner jacket pocket. "Mr. Miller," the man with the scar said, his voice smooth as oil on glass. "We've been looking for you. It seems you've been living a quiet life. Too quiet, perhaps. We're representing some concerned parents from Northwood High. Apparently your daughter has been causing quite a bit of social friction. It would be a shame if that friction turned into a permanent legal situation for you." My father let out a dry, mirthless chuckle that chilled me to the bone. "You've traveled a long way to threaten a high school student, haven't you? You're playing a league you don't understand." "We understand perfectly," the second man piped up, his hand still concealed within his coat. "We understand that you have a history, Miller. We know about your time overseas. We also know that you're currently in possession of materials that the local authorities would find very troubling. A little anonymous tip, a fabricated link to an organized scheme, and some illegally held documents in your attic. That's all it takes. You'll be looking at a massive sentence before you can even call your lawyer. Why ruin a nice retirement?" The threat was clear. They weren't just here to intimidate. They were here to blackmail us into silence, to force me to quit the team and disappear, effectively erasing my existence from their social hierarchy. My father's hand moved behind his back, fingers flexing. I knew that movement. It was the precursor to a takedown. "You talk a lot for people who are about to lose their teeth," my father said, his voice dropping into a deadly, monotone register. "You think you're working for a wealthy cheerleader's father? Look closer. You're being used as disposable assets, and you didn't even do the homework to see who you were walking up to." The man with the scar narrowed his eyes. "We don't need to do homework. We have the backing of the local precinct. We have the resources to ensure you never leave that house in handcuffs. You'll be hauled away in body bags if you try anything heroic." Suddenly, the silent, eerie tension of the driveway was shattered. My father didn't run. He lunged. In a blink, he had closed the distance, his speed defying his size. He didn't use a weapon. He used leverage. He slammed his palm into the second man's chest, the force of the impact sounding like a gunshot. The man doubled over, gasping for air as my father effortlessly disarmed him, pulling a heavy metallic object from his jacket. It wasn't a pistol. It was a digital device, a high-end jammer. "Amateurs," my father spat. He turned to the man with the scar, who now looked less like a corporate fixer and more like a terrified animal. You think you can play games with a man who spent his life dismantling networks like yours? You're not here for a cheerleading spat. You were sent here to scout. You were sent here to see if I was still active. The man with the scar stumbled backward, his hand fumbling for his own device, but he was too slow. My father grabbed his collar and slammed him against the side of our truck. The sound echoed through the quiet suburban street. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, but they saw nothing but a man calming down a couple of aggressive solicitors. That's what my father was. He was a master of perception. "Who sent you?" my father growled, his face inches from the man's terrified eyes. "You don't know who you're dealing with," the man wheezed, his defiance cracking. "The girl's father. He has friends in high places. They've already set the trap. The evidence is being planted as we speak. By the time you get inside, there will be enough prohibited substances and illegal weaponry to bury you for 100 years. My father paused, his expression turning stone cold. He looked back at me, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second before hardening into granite. "Maya, get in the house. Lock the door. Turn on the alarm system. Do not come out until I call you." "Dad, no!" I screamed, but he had already turned back to the men, his hands moving with fluid, terrifying grace. "Wait!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Dad, look!" I pointed down the street. 3 black SUVs, the same heavy-duty models I had seen idling outside the school earlier, were turning the corner, their high beams blinding us. They were moving fast, coordinated, and aggressive. They weren't here to talk anymore. They were here to execute. As the first vehicle swerved to block the driveway, a figure stepped out from the lead car. A man in a tailored suit, holding a folder, flanked by 4 more heavies. It was Chloe's father, and he was holding a badge that looked entirely too official. "Miller!" he bellowed, his voice amplified by a megaphone. "We have a warrant for your immediate arrest and a sweep of this residence for suspected illegal operations. Step away from those men and put your hands where we can see them." My father looked at the incoming tide of SUVs, then back at me. He gave me a wink, a calm, chillingly confident wink, and pulled a small silver item from his pocket, pressing a button on the side. "They want a raid?" he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the roar of the approaching engines. "I'll give them a raid." As the men surrounded us, my father stood perfectly still, waiting for the exact moment the trap was fully sprung, while the front door of our house, the one I had just locked, suddenly kicked open from the inside, and someone wearing a tactical vest stepped out, leveling a weapon at the intruders. The tactical figure stepping from my living room wasn't a neighbor or a burglar. It was Elias, a man I'd only ever known as my father's accountant, a quiet, bespectacled guy who helped with the taxes every April. But the man standing on our porch now was unrecognizable. He moved with a predatory, calculated rhythm, his gear matte black and light refracting, his eyes hidden behind dark, ballistic goggles. He didn't waste a second. With a fluid motion, he leveled his piece, not a lethal weapon, but a specialized containment tool, directly at the lead SUV's tires. Pop! The rubber shredded, and the heavy vehicle listed violently to the right, crashing into the curb with a cloud of burnt dust. Chloe's father, standing in the middle of the street, froze, his megaphone dropping from his hand. He hadn't expected a defense. He had expected a terrified father begging for mercy. He didn't realize he had just declared war on a man who had spent years training the very people who now operated in the shadows of the highest levels of national security. "Down!" my father roared, shoving me behind the reinforced concrete pillar of our porch. The scene erupted into chaos. The men from the SUVs scrambled out, reaching for gear, but they were met with a wall of confusion. My father had activated a signal disruptor the moment Elias stepped out. Their radios went dead, their GPS signals looped, and the arrogance on their faces turned to sheer, panicked confusion. "You think a badge makes you a god?" my father shouted, his voice echoing over the screech of tires. He stepped forward, not toward the intruders, but toward the man who had ordered the raid. He moved like a ghost, weaving through their formation, knocking the wind out of 2 of the heavies with precise, surgical strikes to their pressure points. They collapsed like puppets with their strings cut. "This is a mistake!" Chloe's father screamed, backing away toward the wreckage of his car. "I have the law on my side. This is a state-sanctioned operation. You're just a domestic threat, a loose cannon." My father stopped inches from him. He pulled out his own wallet, not a driver's license, but a small, heavy magnetic card that shimmered with a holographic seal that made the man's eyes widen in terror. You don't have the law, Arthur. You have a handful of hired thugs and a misunderstanding of who lives in this house. You wanted a sweep? You wanted an investigation into my life? You're about to get one. But it won't be from the local precinct. It's going to be from the internal department that handles people like you, who try to weaponize their pathetic little local circles. I watched from behind the pillar, my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't the dad who helped me with my geometry homework. This was a man of power, a man who commanded respect through sheer, terrifying competence. Suddenly, a red laser dot flickered across my father's chest. "Dad!" I screamed. A sniper. Hidden somewhere in the trees across the street. My father didn't flinch. He didn't even turn toward the dot. Instead, he whistled, a short, sharp, bird-like sound. High above us, a low hum filled the air. A drone, silent and sleek, descended from the evening clouds like a hunting hawk. It wasn't our drone, at least I didn't think it was. It hovered over the tree line, its sensors flashing a brilliant, blinding white. A split second later, a beam of concentrated light, a high-intensity dazzler, swept the trees. A man screamed, tumbling from the branches into the bushes below, blinded and incapacitated. The street went deathly silent. My father turned back to the remaining men, his expression devoid of any human warmth. "Go back to your cars. Leave your devices, leave your credentials, and tell your bosses that the Miller file is off limits. If I see one of you near my daughter again, the next response won't be a warning. It will be the total dismantling of your entire financial empire, brick by digital brick." Chloe's father scrambled into the back of a remaining SUV, his face pale, his hands trembling as he pulled out his phone, trying to make a call that wouldn't go through. "You have no idea what you've done," he hissed, his voice cracking with fear. "My connections, the people I work with, they don't play by your rules." "I don't play by any rules, Arthur," my father replied coldly. "I write them." As the SUVs roared to life and scrambled away, leaving their fallen comrades behind, my father turned to face me. His gaze shifted from the predator back to the father, but the shadow of his true self remained behind his eyes. He walked over to me, his hands shaking just slightly. He was trying to contain the adrenaline. "Maya, you're safe," he said softly. But I looked down at the driveway. Among the items the intruders had dropped in their panic, there was a black, leather-bound folder. It had fallen open. I walked over and picked it up. My stomach dropped through the floor. It wasn't a warrant. It was a dossier on me. Inside were photos of me at cheer practice, photos of me coming home from school, and a list of specific, timed threats, all coordinated by someone who wasn't just a local parent. There was a signature at the bottom of the last page, a cryptic symbol I recognized from the news as the mark of a high-level, international shadow brokerage. I looked up at my father, terrified. "Dad, they weren't just here because of the cheer team. This is a hit list, and my name is at the top." My father took the folder, his face turning an ash-gray color I had never seen before. He looked down the street, then back at the dark, silent house. "They didn't come here to bully you, Maya," he whispered, his voice trembling with a new, deeper dread. "They came here because they realized who I was, and they decided to use you as the bait to draw out my old handlers. The war isn't coming to our house, it's already inside." Just then, his phone vibrated. It was a restricted, encrypted number. He answered it, and as he listened, his eyes locked onto mine with a look of absolute, soul-crushing defeat. "It's too late," he said, hanging up. "They've triggered the protocol. We have 10 minutes before this entire block is cordoned off and wiped from the map." 10 minutes. The phrase hung in the air, heavier than the gathering storm clouds, freezing the very oxygen in my lungs. My father didn't waste a second on explanations. He grabbed my arm, his grip firm but grounding, and pulled me toward the back of the house. Behind us, the streetlights began to flicker and die, one by one, like a row of falling dominoes. The silence that followed was unnatural. The birds had stopped singing, the wind had died down, and even the distant hum of the highway seemed to have been muffled by an invisible, suffocating dome. "Elias!" my father barked, and the man in the tactical vest didn't hesitate. He dropped the containment device, pulled a specialized breaching tool from his kit, and smashed it against the siding of our garage. A hidden panel groaned open, revealing a reinforced basement entrance that I had never known existed. "We have to go, now!" my father commanded. We sprinted through the dark, damp passage, the walls lined with steel mesh and thick, acoustic-dampening foam. As we descended, the ground shuddered beneath us. A low-frequency hum, deep enough to vibrate my teeth, began to pulse through the concrete. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the sound of a systemic shutdown, a high-level digital and physical purge of the entire grid surrounding our neighborhood. "What is this, Dad?" I gasped, stumbling as we navigated the narrow, subterranean hallway. "Who are they? Why would they wipe an entire block just to get to us?" "They aren't just they, Maya," he said, his voice hard as tempered glass. "They are the shadow infrastructure of the very organization I spent my life dismantling. They're a high-level network, a group that operates in the space between nations, and they've been waiting for me to slip up for years. By letting those bullies at school provoke me, by forcing me to reveal my resources to protect you, they forced me to show my hand. Now, they're closing the trap. They want to erase everything that links me to the agency, and that includes our house, our history, and, unfortunately, us." We reached a small, cramped room deep beneath the foundation. It was packed with high-end server racks, glowing blue in the dim light, and a single, heavy-duty monitor displaying a map of our suburban neighborhood. The red outlines on the map were moving inward, circling our property like a closing noose. "Is this it?" I whispered, looking at the screens. "Are we going to die here?" My father looked at me, his eyes showing a flash of raw, human vulnerability that broke my heart more than the situation itself. He reached out and brushed a lock of hair from my face. "I promised your mother I would never let anything happen to you. I failed to keep the shadows away from your door, but I won't fail to get you out." Suddenly the screen blinked. A line of text appeared in bold red letters. "Protocol Alpha 9 initiated. Containment in progress. No survivors." "They're not just wiping the records," Elias said, his voice grim. "They're initiating a total denial strike, a localized collapse." Before I could ask what that meant, a massive explosion rocked the foundation above us. Dust and debris rained down, and the lights in the server room flickered and died, leaving us in near total darkness. The emergency red backup lights kicked in, bathing the room in a sickly crimson glow. "Elias, status!" my father shouted. "They've bypassed the perimeter firewalls," Elias yelled over the roar of collapsing structures above. "We're cut off! The main tunnel is blocked!" My father grabbed a heavy metal cylinder from a wall rack and slammed it into a slot on the server wall. It hissed, a pressurized mist filling the room. "Maya, get in the secondary chamber, now!" He shoved me into a small, steel-lined closet in the back of the basement. It was barely big enough for me to sit down. I tried to pull him in with me, but he slammed the heavy, blast-proof door shut, locking it from the outside. "Dad, no, don't you dare!" I screamed, pounding on the door. "Open this! You can't leave me in here." "I'm not leaving you, I'm securing you," he shouted back, his voice muffled by the thick steel. "The bunker has an autonomous oxygen supply and a reinforced shell. Nothing can break through it. But the room outside is going to be flooded with a suppression agent to cover our tracks. I have to stay out here to manually override the server logs. If I don't, they'll trace us to our next location within minutes. I don't care about the logs. I care about you." "Maya, listen to me." His voice was calm, authoritative, the voice of the man who had led missions across the globe. "Whatever happens out there, you do not open this door until you hear the signal. 3 knocks, a pause, and one final, heavy strike. If you don't hear that exact sequence, you stay hidden. Do you understand?" "Dad, please. Do you understand?" "Yes," I sobbed, my voice breaking. "Good. I love you, kiddo. Stay brave." He turned away. I heard the frantic clicking of his fingers against the keyboard, the hum of the servers accelerating into a high-pitched whine. Then, the heavy hiss of gas began to fill the outer room. I could hear Elias coughing, then the sound of metal being torn and the muffled shouting of men, invaders who had breached the basement. A violent struggle broke out just inches from my door. I heard the distinct thud of a body hitting the wall, the crack of a weapon being discharged. Not a loud bang, but a sharp, suppressed thwip, and then a terrifying silence. My heart hammered against my ribs like a caged bird. I crouched in the dark, my hands over my ears, praying for the sound of his voice. Suddenly, the door to the bunker shuddered. Someone was outside. My breath hitched as I waited, my eyes glued to the small, reinforced slit in the steel door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks rang out. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. A pause followed, long, agonizingly long. My heart skipped a beat. This was it. It was the signal. I reached for the latch, my hand trembling violently. But then, as I began to lift the handle, the person on the other side didn't deliver the final, heavy strike. Instead, they leaned in close to the door, their voice a whisper that made my blood run cold. It wasn't my father. It was a cold, unfamiliar, and deeply menacing tone that sounded like grinding glass. "We know you're in there, Maya," the voice purred, "and we know your father isn't coming back to open the door." The voice from the other side of the door was like a serpent's hiss, smooth and devoid of any humanity. My hand, which had been seconds away from lifting the latch, paralyzed in midair. I didn't dare breathe. I didn't dare move. My father's instructions echoed in my mind. "If you don't hear the exact sequence, you stay hidden." The signal was 3 knocks, a pause, and one final heavy strike. This stranger had skipped the final act. They were baiting me, trying to lure me into a trap they hadn't yet been able to force open. "We have the override codes, little bird," the voice continued, mocking and patient. "Your father is currently occupied. He fought well, but he's out of time, and you're out of options. Why prolong the inevitable?" I pressed my back against the cold steel of the bunker wall, my eyes darting around the tiny, dimly lit space. I had to think. If my father was occupied, it meant he was either incapacitated or buying me time. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against a small, concealed emergency transmitter my father had sewn into my cheer jacket weeks ago. A just-in-case piece of tech I thought was overkill at the time. I activated it, praying it wasn't being jammed by the suppression agent filling the room outside. "He's not coming back," the voice outside repeated, followed by the sound of a heavy tool scraping against the door's hinges. Sparks began to fly, casting flickering demonic shadows through the narrow viewing slit. They were trying to melt the lock. I looked at the emergency console in the corner of my bunker. It was a secondary override system, one my father had mentioned only in passing. "If they get inside the perimeter, use the red pulse." I punched in the code, my birthday followed by his service serial number. The monitor hummed, a blue light bathing the small space. "Emergency broadcast initiated," the screen flashed. "Recovery signal active." Suddenly, the floor beneath me vibrated. It wasn't the sound of an explosion, but the distant, rhythmic thrum of heavy rotor blades. Extraction. Outside, the man at the door stopped scraping. He went silent, clearly sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The heavy metal door shuddered as he hammered against it, but the bunker was built to withstand a direct hit. The thrumming grew into a roar, a massive, military-grade transport hovering directly above our house. "Plan B!" someone screamed from outside, followed by the frantic sound of running boots. They were retreating. I didn't open the door. I waited, huddled in the dark until the roar subsided and the world went eerily quiet once more. Only then, after what felt like an eternity, did I hear it. Knock, knock, knock. A long, agonizing pause. Thud! A final, heavy, deliberate strike that vibrated the entire bunker. I sobbed, the sound tearing from my chest, and lunged for the latch. I threw the door open, ready to collapse into my father's arms. But instead of my father, I saw Elias, bruised, bleeding from a cut on his temple, and flanked by 2 men in standard, nondescript tactical gear. Men I recognized as my father's actual colleagues, the ones who didn't exist on paper. "Maya," Elias gasped, looking exhausted. "Thank God." "Where is he?" I screamed, grabbing his collar. "Where is my dad?" Elias looked away, his expression pained. He pointed toward the basement stairs. My father was sitting on the concrete floor, leaning against a pile of broken equipment. He was covered in soot, his shirt torn, and he was clutching his side, but he was alive. His eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, he let go of the soldier persona. He looked like a tired, proud, and deeply relieved man. The aftermath was a blur. The entire block was declared a natural gas leak, the official cover story provided by the agency to hide the existence of the shadow brokerage's failed hit. The house was a total loss, but as we stood on the street corner watching the fire crews douse the remaining embers, I felt a strange sense of peace. Chloe and her father were long gone. The agency had handled them, not with violence, but with a swift, absolute dismantling of their influence. By the next week, the story in town was that the family had moved to Europe for business reasons. Their assets frozen, their reputation turned to ash. Chloe's influence at Northwood had vanished overnight, her name erased from the school's history as if she had never been the queen of the halls. I stood on the sidewalk, my bags packed for a new life. We weren't going back to Northwood. We were going somewhere else, a place with no history, no cameras, and no bullies. My father walked up to me, his gait still a little stiff from the fight. He reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You were brave, Maya, braver than I ever expected you to need to be." "I just wanted to be a cheerleader," I whispered, a sad smile touching my lips. "I just wanted to be normal." He looked at the horizon, his gaze steady and clear. "Normal is a luxury, kiddo, but from now on, we get to decide what that looks like. No more shadows, no more games." As we walked toward the waiting transport, I looked back at the ruins of our old life. The bully, the threats, the constant fear, it had all tried to break us, but it had only revealed what we were truly made of. I held my father's hand, feeling the strength in his grip. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the future. The war was over, the file was closed, and as the vehicle pulled away, I realized that I didn't need to be a cheerleader to be a champion. I was Maya Miller, and I had survived the worst they had to offer. And that was enough.